Every story is a piece of art.
My name is Effie Ncube. I'm a human rights defender for a long time in Zimbabwe. We have not lived up to the expectations of the Constitution in respect of a free and fair election. Our Constitution goes at length before you even go to the Electoral Act. The Constitution itself provides a sufficient basis for a democratic, free and fair, credible and transparent election. And there has been no movement towards that at all. Our Constitution also provides for the freedom of association, which is the bedrock of any democratic society. If you twin that with the freedom of expression, then you have a movement towards a true democracy. And there hasn't been sufficient movement towards that. And what we have seen, for instance, post-2013, is the state folding back some of the provisions of the Constitution, not just through the amendments of the Constitution, but also through the laws like your recent amendments to the Criminal Codification and Reform Act, the so-called patriotic provisions of the law. We are seeing the Private Voluntary Organizations Amendment Bill that is going through Parliament, which will essentially, and in a very serious way, restrict civic space, the democratic space that the Constitution has granted to the people of Zimbabwe. And let us not forget that this Constitution is an outcome of a broader consensus, a broad-based consensus in Zimbabwe at the time when it was made, from 2009 to 2013. And prior to that, there was this huge mobilized civil society, church, and ordinary citizens for a new Constitution. So there has been a fundamental lack on that. Devolution has not come. There is no Devolution Act. Money is just going to communities in districts without a specific clear law to protect those resources. We also have not seen a clear movement towards consolidating the independence of the judiciary that was provided for earlier on in the Constitution. So what we have now is also that particular front being folded back, so that again and again you see this assault on the independence of the judiciary, on civil society, and on democratic institutions and tenets. So what we need now is to recreate a movement that we had, the movement that we had in the 1990s, early 2000s, for all the people of Zimbabwe wanting a new Constitution. But this time around, it has to be all of us defending the Constitution, ensuring that no law is implemented out there that does not fall in line with the Constitution, to ensure that the democratic provisions of the Constitution are adhered to, that the contraventions that we are seeing of the provision of the Constitution do not continue. Otherwise, at the end of the day, we will not have a Constitution to talk about. It is the responsibility of civil society, of the entirety of the people of Zimbabwe, to defend the Constitution. It is a piece of paper until it has a movement behind it that defends it. Otherwise, you can only have democracy, a Constitution, if you can defend it. The starting point is to acknowledge that we have a country, but we do not have a nation. We are still multiple ethnic groups that are dotted all over the country. And one of the key responsibilities of a new government in 1980 was supposed to create a united Zimbabwean nation. And you do that by establishing a set of values around which people will gather. Democratic tenets around which people will gather, so that all of us, we identify with the specifics that are in the Constitution as aspirational, as things to be achieved, and not as things that are just contrived from the air. So we did not have that, we still do not have that. We still do not have a nation in Zimbabwe. The National Peace and Reconciliation Commission was also supposed to work on issues of past conflicts, serious violations of human rights and the like, so that we utilize the opportunities of resolving what happened in the past as a building block for bringing people together. That did not happen. Don't forget that the NPRC was created in 2013. For 5 years, there was no NPRC Act to enable it to operate. And once that act came into place in 2018, the Commission did not have money to budget to operate on. So there was no political will right from the beginning to address issues of transitional justice, dealing with the past of what happened right across the country. You have so many human rights violations that took place that we cannot move as a nation without resolving them. Be it Kukura Wundi, be it Mbrambazwina and all other things, you need a sufficient capital invested, social capital invested into resolving, addressing some of those very serious matters. It is out of resolving those or addressing those constraints that a united nation will emerge. So it is important that we don't take our eyes away from that ball. We keep focused, even if the NPRC is no longer there. We continue to push as the people of Zimbabwe for addressing the past issues so that we have a united future to focus on. Interesting also, when you are looking at the Constitution, you don't look at it as something where you have that provision versus that provision. You read the Constitution as a whole, as a single document. So the provisions of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission and whatever it was supposed to do, together with the provisions of Chapter 14 around the devolution and the like, were meant to ensure that those regions, those portions of the country that have been marginalized because of pulling together of resources around the center of accumulation, that would be, in this particular instance, for many people, they look at Harare and see it as where the economy is, where political power is, and so forth. So what the Constitution sought to do was to move power away from Harare, not just decentralize, but devolve power and resources so that it goes out there to the centers of impact, where poverty is greatest, where hunger is greatest, where the demands for employment and other livelihoods are greatest, to give those power the opportunity, the right and the power to make the decisions about their lives. Nothing of that sort has happened. So that's a fundamental gap in terms of nation building. If you don't have that, if you don't enable regions out there to be able to grow, to prosper, then you will have two nations existing in the country, one urban, one rural. You will have two nations existing in the country, a prosperous nation and a poor majority. Is something that the Constitution sought to address, and there hasn't been any political will, unfortunately, to move with the provision of the Constitution. We need to push towards that ultimately.